How many times do I have to say this? Or number 796 on AnnaVonReitz.com. I'm calling this also the checklist. Day after day, I get all these complaints, all these awful stories of abuse, all these claims of wrongdoing by the federal government, and every day I give everyone the tools to defend themselves from the presumption of federal citizenship that is the enabling clause of all these abuses and problems. I have given you all more than enough instruction and information to remove yourselves and your name and estate from these evil legal presumptions. These are weapons of defense, means to protect yourself and your assets. Number 1, authenticate copies of your birth certificate. Study what I have told you about this, what this document is, and how it is used so that you can competently claim to be the living and fully insured subrogee. 2, record your common law copyright and standing writ of habeas corpus as part of issuing a certificate of assumed name, claiming all right and interest in all the different variations of your given name back to the day you were born, and claiming their permanent domicile on the land and soil of the state where you were born. Correct the deed and title of land and homes and other property held in your name so that it is clearly identified as private, non-taxable property, and rename it under your own copyright signed designation like 111101 Pine Court instead of whatever street or lot or block or other description is being used now. 4, order Z, as in Regulation Z of the Motor Vehicle Code, license plates for your car to establish that it is private property and exempt from federal regulation. 5, put retired labels on all passports and driver's license, etc., clearly establishing that you are not functioning as a federal citizen now. 6, check into your family history and, if possible, demonstrate using public records, births, deaths, census, marriage, etc. Stand ready to prove who you are and where you come from. 7, download and print a copy of pamphlet 27-1-161-1, The Law of Peace, from the website we shared, and have it ready to present if you're ever forced to appear in one of their courts, and demand that you are addressed properly as a peaceful non-combatant and non-citizen national of these actual factual United States of America. Invoke the standing writ of habeas corpus contained in your certificate of assumed name and present the authenticated birth certificate for collection of the bounty on the federal person. Revoke your election to pay federal income taxes by giving notice to the Commissioner of the IRS and the Internal Revenue Service. Make Stephen T. Mnuchin, Secretary of the Treasury, responsible to you as the fiduciary responsible for the administration of the federal person, thereby denying any such position to the local court clerk. 10, post your own private indemnity bond with the U.S. Treasury or take shelter under the bond established for your State of the Union. You need to defend yourselves and correct your own records and bring home the facts in a way that these yahoos can't ignore or sidestep. And you need to establish your claim to your own names, estates, and political status. There's nothing so difficult about this once you grasp the fact that what you thought of as your government is just a foreign contractor here to provide governmental services. It's a foreign corporation like Target with no authority over you or your property, but if you don't correct the public records and rebut their false claims, they'll be happy to impose their rules and their government upon you. Get moving now. Save yourselves and your country. See this and over 700 other essays on Anna's website at AnnaVonReitz.com. Find the PayPal button. Give generously. You spell it ANNAVONREITZ.com. Are you a HueMan? The entrapment game on a global scale. Reading from AnnaVonReitz.com. For the last year or so, I keep knocking into bright-eyed, bushy-tailed idealists preaching about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights promoted by the United Nations. A HueMan, by legal definition, is not a man or a woman. It's a color of man, something that appears to be man but isn't actually. It's similar to color of law, a statute or other representation that appears to be a law but isn't. Another definition of human is monster, a thing. And again, not a man or a woman. So are you a human? No. Should humans have rights? Arguably not if they exist. Why would you give rights to something that only appears to be a man, but which is in fact a monster, an animal, or a thing only appearing to be a man? Universal Declaration of Sasquatch Rights? What does that have to do with the price of beans in China? Let me tell you, it's all about what lawyers call admissions. And it is the same filthy game that you've already seen before when they use similar names deceits to get your mother to agree that you were a U.S. citizen. She admitted to it, so it must be true, right? Even if she was deceived, even if she was coerced, there's a record of accusation called an information signed by your own mother, standing against your good name, admitting that you are a U.S. citizen. Oh, and also an unwanted bastard child born out of wedlock and cast upon the mercy of the state of whatever corporation as a ward of the state. In fact, unless you are a federal employee or dependent or political asylum seeker, there is no way that you are now, nor ever were a U.S. citizen, nor have you ever been a citizen of the United States. But by getting your mother and you to ignorantly sign paperwork agreeing that you are such a citizen, the vermin have an excuse for treating you as one. And that's the whole point of the exercise, to test you and see if you know who and what you are. If you don't, you are prey. This is how they gain the evidence needed to presume against you in court. This is how they allege that you are liable to pay federal income taxes, that you are obligated to follow all 80 million federal codes and statutes, that you are responsible for paying their public debts, that you are subject to their government, that you are eligible and required to pay into Social Security, which is their private pension plan, and so on. If you admit to being a U.S. citizen, you are one until you go through a very arduous learning and reclamation process to prove that you aren't in fact a U.S. citizen and don't desire any such foreign political status. So that's the entrapment game. Get you to ignorantly admit being something you aren't and then take full advantage of the admission. It's the same thing when admitting to being human. If you are not a man, they are justified in treating you as something subhuman, something that merely appears to be a man, and the whole diatribe about human rights is just sop, a means of allegedly providing you with benefits that you are already owed anyway, that cost them nothing in exchange for your admission that you aren't really a man or a woman and are therefore inferior and subject to them. Another common gambit is to call you Mr. or Miss or Mrs. or some other title. Titles are a British means to subject people to the rule of their government. In fact, a Mr. is either a midshipman in the British Navy or a warrant officer in the British Merchant Marines, which is, interestingly enough, also the definition of a withholding agent. I once witnessed an absolutely brilliant defense against tax charges. It was clear that the man had won his case. As he was walking out, the judge called to him, "Mr. Smith," not really his name, but you get the point. And he didn't immediately object, and he didn't just keep walking. The victim turned around and answered politely, and zap, right back into the net. Right back into the presumption that he was in fact a Mr., a renegade withholding agent who failed to do his duty and didn't give the Queen and the Pope their cut. The judge then proceeded to ream him and sentence him on the spot to 3 years in jail and a huge fine, and the poor man had no idea what had happened and why. Now, you know, and I know, that he admitted to being a Mr., which then gave the judge needed prima facie evidence to convict him of tax fraud. It's the same thing with the word resident. U.S. citizens, real ones, can't own land in the States because they're foreigners merely residing here on a temporary basis while they conduct their business of providing essential government services. If you admit to being a resident either by calling yourself one or by allowing one of them to apply that description to you, your claim to own your own property, as in a foreclosure case where this is a common ploy, flies right out the window. Such verbal tricks are the stock and trade of these fraud artists, and you must learn to be wary and recognize them and rebut them whenever and wherever they rear their ugly heads. Anytime anyone applies any kind of descriptive label to you, balk. Object. Even if you're not sure that there's any agenda afoot, object and demur anyway. Give yourself a chance to look up the legal meaning of the words or force your opponent to define the meaning of the word for you. Anyway, a big thumbs down on human rights and a big thumbs up for the natural and unalienable rights of all natural men and women worldwide. Next time someone starts blathering to you about human rights, you know what to do. Look that glazed over, starry-eyed individual in the eye with a straight face, as straight a face as you can manage, and say, "Oh, how interesting. Are you a monster or just favorable to their cause?" See this and over 700 other essays on Anna's website at annavonreitz.com, spelled ANNAVONREITZ.com. Here are the smoking guns, Mr. Trump, reading from annavonreitz.com. Well, folks, for all those who have poo-pooed what I've been teaching about jurisdiction and the fact that the American people have been bamboozled and mistreated by their own employees, the members of Congress and the military, we now have the definitive proof in their own words. Pamphlet 27-161-1 from the War Department / Department of the Army at the link is provided at www.loc.gov. You can look at it on this essay provided in the link below. This little document, only 232 pages, was supposed to be widely distributed to the public and the court system back in 1959 and wasn't. Please notice the title, The Law of Peace. This is what the dirty bastards have owed to the American states and people since 1860, and what they have deliberately withheld on false pretenses so that they could justify creating public trusts in our names and then raping and pillaging those public trusts. It's not just the filthy crooked Congress, it's the filthy crooked military leadership as well. This has not taken place in a vacuum. They knew what they owed us. They knew what they were supposed to be doing. And here's the proof, published in their own words with their own document numbers. Again, and a link is provided. Read it and weep. And as for me, I am totally justified. Everything I said, everything I told you, that's jurisdictions. The jurisdictions. The citizens, the nationals, all of it, black and white. Take that, Larry B. Kraft. Take that, Bob Hertz. Stuff it, American Bar Association. The American Bar Association has been nothing but a worthless, self-perpetuating crime syndicate on our shores, a professional fellowship for pirates engaged by foreign governments for the express purpose of pillaging innocent people, and then using the ill-gotten gains to go pillage more innocent people throughout the world. All the, quote, law schools in this country might as well be burned down and turned into hospices, and all the military schools, too. We have somehow perpetuated a military that speaks of honor and has none. Our own military has sunk lower than the worst kind of third world junta, and they have less excuse because they have had the trust and power and wealth and education and privilege to do things according to the actual law and according to their oaths, and they have failed us. They have failed the entire world. When I read this document in their own words, part of me wanted to explode with satisfaction. Here at last, unequivocally, flatly, in the flesh, is the proof of all that I have said, and proof that they knew too, and tied up and wrapped with a bow. And the other part of me wanted to find a bathroom and retch. Because what this also proves is that the extent of the corruption that has infested not only the Congress, but the entire military infrastructure as well. The judge advocate generals have known all along that the American people were owed the law of peace, and they sat there on their velvet tufts and imposed the law of war instead. They did this in the most venal self-interest. They did this with the most venal self-interest imaginable. They did this in gross disrespect of the public law, in gross disrespect of their oaths and obligations, and in gross disregard of international law as well. Everyone who has occupied the office of Judge Advocate General since 1959 deserves to be court-martialed. According to the distribution page on pamphlet 27-161-1, every legal services unit in the active Army, the National Guard, and the Army Reserve received a copy. As if this is not enough to prove the complicity and the gross betrayal by Congress and the U.S. military of their employers, we have this expose from Forbes magazine and the University of Michigan, and a link is provided at Forbes.com. The name of the article is, "Has Our Government Spent $21 Trillion of Our Money Without Telling Us?" The amount of money mysteriously missing from these military budgets just happens to be roughly the same amount as the national credit owed to the American states and people, $21 trillion. Remember that the way the system is set up, their U.S. national debt always exactly equals the national credit owed to the American states and people. So where's the national credit? Was the first question out of my mouth many years ago, and now we know. Read that. Our own military embezzled the national credit owed to you and your family and sunk it offshore somewhere for their own benefit. Who is responsible for this outrage? Members of Congress and the various secretaries of defense, beginning with Donald Rumsfeld. The vermin have borrowed against our assets under false pretenses, our land and our labor, until they could borrow no more. They have stolen the credit owed to us, and they are sitting there in Washington, D.C., planning their excuses for imposing martial law, which they have been imposing illegally for 150 years anyway. The American states and people were always their priority creditors, and they knew it. And they stole your credit and lied about the entire circumstance to the American people and the rest of the world. These horrific liars and hypocrites have done this all to the tune of Yankee Doodle Dandy and quaint little books about George Washington and the cherry tree fed to school children to indoctrinate them into believing their big lies and continuing to go along and serve this monstrosity without question. Forget the Russians, forget the Muslims, forget the Zionists too. The evil is right here, right in your face, just as Edward Snowden told everyone it was. It's homegrown, not imported. It's right here in the run-amok federal agencies, the DOJ that couldn't find justice or their butts with both hands, the FBI, the BATF, the CIA, the DIA, the DARPA, the FEMA, the Homeland Security, the NSA, the BLM, the IRS, the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, the whole lying, rotten pack of disgusting predatory vermin who can't seem to do their jobs or figure out who in the hell they actually work for. It's the departments of the government, too, the Department of Treasury, that hasn't existed as part of our actual government since 1924. All of this so incredibly mucked up and criminalized that it defies description. And let's not forget the Federal Reserve, a bunch of nasty old European interests that never actually had a leg to stand on, a pot to piss in or a place to throw it out. Only Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal Democrats decided to give our country and the value of our labor and our gold and silver reserves to them in exchange for their support of the Democratic Party quasi-communist agenda. And that isn't saying that the Republican Party is much better either, because they've sat on the sidelines and sucked off the cream and wrangled to benefit their own corporate interests with complete disregard for this country and for the people who sent them to Washington, and without any more regard for law or honesty or honor than the filthy Democrats who sought to enslave everyone on this continent. Mr. Trump doesn't just have the job of draining the swamp. He's being forced to use alligators to do it. So now that you all have the facts and the proof, where are your mops and buckets? Light up those switchboards, make those telephones ring, hit the share button until your finger bleeds. Sit down and explain it to your wife. We've been betrayed from within by unimaginably corrupt and stupid members of the U.S. Congress and even more corrupt members of the U.S. military. Make the bad news go viral, because the first step towards solving a problem is knowing that you have a problem and defining what it is, and then bringing pressure to bear against those responsible, the judge advocate generals in particular, the members of Congress in general, the so-called Federal Reserve, the IMF, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the heads of the agencies and commissions, the cabinet members and department heads, all the politicians from here to breakfast. Print copies of this article and copies of the Law of Peace pamphlet and copies of the Forbes magazine article, and dump millions of copies on the internet worldwide so that the truth can't be erased by another convenient book burning or computer failure. Save copies on your hard drives and back them up. Make hard copies for your personal libraries. Make a hard copy of the pamphlet and take it to court with you, ready to throw down in front of the judge. Make them run screaming into the bushes where they belong, cowering under a fence with a porcupine as their only friend. Start asking, hey, where's my $21 trillion national credit? Why am I being mischaracterized as a U.S. citizen when I'm not and don't want to be? Who the hell is responsible for falsifying all these public documents? Why am I being tried in a military tribunal under the law of war when I'm owed the law of peace? What kind of fraud game is going on here? What do you people think? Who do you people think you are? How dare you put your filthy mitts in my pockets and think I'm obligated to pay your salaries for this kind of, quote, service? Just say no. Say it loud, say it clear, let it be heard from sea to shining sea, and join the chorus. See this and over 700 other essays on his website, AnnaVonReitz.com. Give via PayPal, and you spell it ANNAVONREITZ.com.